You're speaking there to something that I really have become quite aware to in the past year or two, is just the absolute just degradation of the idea of journalism generally. It is so it is so rare to find really good quality journalism in a mainstream paper at the minute. Because that used to be like what we paid for. Like that's what you were buying the paper for, was to fund the quality journalism. Like the government used to say something, or there would be an event, and then the journalist would come in and go deep into it. They would figure out what's going on, what's the cost of whatever policy, who is suggesting it, were there conflicts of interest, like on any issue. And that just doesn't happen anymore. It's all like salacious rubbish. And it's all just like this theater. It's become like CNN's political theater, just on the entire scale of our press, where the good journalism is so difficult to find, and when you see it, it shocks you. Like I was reading, and I brought this up a couple times in different podcasts with people. I was reading last year about the Northern Ireland Assembly had like a late night debate discussion thing about whether they were going to extend one of the lockdowns. And Sam McBride from the newsletter, the guy who wrote Burned, which was the book about the RHI scandal in Northern Ireland, he basically just wrote on the newsletter a very beautiful, maybe 1,500 words, 2,000 word summary of what happened. Just of what happened, like the actual facts of what happened. And I read it and was like, wow, someone's actually told me what has happened. They haven't like given me 3 lines and then spent the rest of it on some randomer's opinion, or just picked out a few random blue check mark tweets and gone, well, this is clearly the prevailing opinion. He actually told me what happened, and it was beautiful. Like, what happened to that in your mind? Like, where do we lose like journalism as an idea?
In many ways, I'm a materialist. You always want to look at the base material motivations for things. It shapes very much the culture. Weirdly enough, like obviously the far right or the alt right would say the inverse. They say culture shapes politics, but
that's the Steve Bannon theory, isn't it?
A material base, and what happens is that like for every journalist, you need around about 1,000 readers for advertising money to make sense to be able to afford their wages. And as readership goes down for paid paper publications, and this transition to online for the establishment media comes about, where you're actually having to pay Facebook, you're having to pay for your articles to be seen, and let's get it right, establishment news outlets are also propagandist organizations representing a position, so they do pay because they do need their positions to be seen by a large number of people, and they need to maintain that market segment for clout, but they're not making the money any longer. So what happens is actually you just see a vast swathe of journalists just starting to get laid off, or sort of grandfathered out as people retire, no new people are hired. Like a friend of mine went to work for the Daily Mail after qualifying, doing his journalism. And say what you like about the Daily Mail, they did the reporting. I think they're the only ones, or one of the only ones, that still have an investigative department. He was working for the Mail Online, it turned out, and he was sent 20 pictures a day with no context and just said, write 200 words about this. Sexy Serena Williams skips over a puddle, right? Serena Williams has won this amount of Wimbledon titles, and that's his job all day, every day. 60% of trained journalists now work in PR, public relations. Like if you're a trained and qualified journalist, and it requires training and qualification, like that's the other thing. Citizen journalism isn't going to replace it, because you need to be paid, you need to have expertise, you need to know a patch, you need to be able to you balance the information that's coming in and work out where there are conflicts of interest, and talk about those vested interests that each person has. But especially knowing a patch, being a court reporter, being an investigative journalist or environmental reporter or workplace reporter, these are things that are specialisms, they're skills. And you need to not only have the contacts, but you need to understand, say, with workplace reporting, what strike laws are. Like, what a union struggle could look like, what a negotiating table looks like. So, as well as being able to paint a picture with words that puts the reader in that place. And it just becomes too expensive to do because they're not making enough money. And that's why you've seen recently in Australia the fight between Google and the Australian government, because the Australian government is saying what a lot of governments are saying is that we need to maintain essentially these propagandist outlets who've usually put the government of the day in their place. We have to pay them back that favour. We need to get some money out of these new monopolies into the existing monopolies who are our friends. You know, Viscount Rothermere, who owns the Daily Mail, you know, the Barclay brothers who own the Telegraph, you know, that like Rupert Murdoch, obviously, in 3 countries. We need to look after him because he's savage and he will ruin our lives if we don't, right? So they have to pay back that favour, and they're working out how to get money out of Google. But what Google's not doing is giving money to organisations that are independent. In fact, Facebook, what they're doing, because they don't want to become a regulator because it costs money, it's too hard, they're just like, fuck it, we will shut down all the far right, but also all the left, all the independent media. We'll just kick it all off. And YouTube is starting to do the same thing because this is political content. It's not worth our time and effort. We don't make enough money out of it. You know, like let's have cats playing pianos. And if people want their news, then we can go with these things that already exist. And all of those things in the past decade have shifted their models from journalism to opinion, and now their model is based around that, which is we measure success by clicks, not by paying readers. We don't have the responsibility of journalism. And let's be clear, journalism, the ideals of journalism were built up over a couple hundred years. They didn't just start like that. You know, and it was always a thin, you know, who got access, who got to write in these things. Even if you're like great, like Jonathan Cook or John Pilger, right? You're still an old white guy. Like, I don't see many working class people of different ethnicities. We don't see majority world people reporting. We don't really talk about the world much any longer in British publications. There's very much since 2010 a turn inwards, which feeds into Brexit and stuff like that. It's too expensive to cover the world and people aren't that interested, you know, but underlying it is this money. It's money. Like, how can we do it? And the same problems will occur for the independent media. Independent media cannot scale up unless we work out ways that we can reach new and wider and bigger audiences, but also make sure that people can easily pay to support the journalism they like. And here's one of the key things. We have to create a culture shift, a massive culture shift that says this: if we don't pay for our journalism, someone else is, and they don't have our interests at heart. We don't pay for it, someone else is. We know who they are. They're massive corporations. Like, you know, Peter Oborne, a conservative commentator, leaves the Telegraph because HSBC are paying so much to the Barclay brothers that he's not allowed to report on the LIBOR scandal, on the scandal. Like, every other paper's reporting on it, but the Telegraph isn't that. And that's a very extreme example, because you don't need to censor your writers. You just select the right ones. People don't need to be told to shut up. Yeah, like Chomsky's once sitting with Andrew Marr. Andrew Marr says, no one ever tells me what to report. And he says, of course they don't. They don't need to. You wouldn't be here if they needed to tell you what to report on. You're the right person for the job. Who gets those jobs? So it was already a struggling system, but there was a sense that there was values of journalism that existed. That's been changed by the growth of Internet 2.0 and the social media boom. And that's where we have to come in with a 3.0 and change things back. Value journalism, people value it. And that's where, again, people hate to talk about this, but that's where money matters. Money matters. We have to pay for it or someone else will. Nothing comes for free, especially not information about the world.
Do you think it has to be digital? Because one of the things I've kind of thought about is that, like, I like my physical thing in my hand. Like, I don't mind reading my news online and whatnot, but when I want to explore something, I quite like having it in my hand. If it's a book or if it's, say, Private Eye, who have become like so crucial in our news environment, and their success kind of proves that if you do quality work, people will pay for it. And the other company that springs to mind is Byline Times. Like, I know they produce their monthly like print edition. I talked to Hardeep Mataru about it, the editor, and it got me wondering, like, do you think it has to be digital? Is that just where we're at? Because I mean, that's not exactly a bad thing, but I'm curious as to whether you think if people were producing, say there was a paper out there doing investigative work like Private Eye are doing, like a daily, would they be as successful, or is there just oversaturation in the kind of like daily news cycle, and it has to be digital?
I don't think daily news probably has a future in print. The entry costs are just way too high. There's talk going around of there's always talk, but there's talk going around of creating an aggregated paper with all the independent media sources, fill it up so you get a bit from Novara and a bit from Byline and a bit from Declassified UK, right? And you put it into print. The costs of entry are really high. It's not just the printing costs, though those are very high. It's the distribution. Distribution is extraordinarily expensive, right? But there is a future in print, and it comes, in my mind, from a concept, again, developed in the Netherlands, or I've seen in its highest fruition in the Netherlands, which is slow news. The idea of slow news, which is we take time to reflect on the facts, and then we give you a reflection on these. We give you fully rounded journalism when we've got everything together, because we know that a lot of stuff gets missed in instant reaction. A lot of stuff does. And we see a growth in publications like Tribune in the UK, which is a socialist paper, publication, magazine, a quarterly, a journal. You see growth in, you've seen a lot of downtick during the pandemic, massive downtick, but we have partners in the Independent Media Association that we'll work with through Bywire, like Red Pepper, New Internationalist, that are magazines. And I look at subscribing to a bunch of things because I'm old maybe, but I think people still like this. The feeling of a well-designed magazine that turns up, it's like your little treat, and you're like, oh, I'm going to get to that later, and then you leave it by the toilet or by your coffee table. You're like, I'll have a chill, catch up on a couple of things. London Review of Books is fantastic, right? Like it's got really great. Like I learned about like how MI5 had offices in the BBC up until the late 90s.
Yeah.
And they vetted every single person that went on and who was hired by them. And they probably still do, by the way. They just don't have the offices there. They can do it remotely now.
Yeah.
But you go in.
You're on there like Tinder, like swiping.
Yeah. That's not the face for us. They're just like, that Family Guy color scale.
Like holding it up beside them, like
they're just like, like in the right light. Essayists. Again, you see the growth in the US of journals and long form essayists and stuff like that. There is going to be massively, that's going to be a part. I think, if anything, we've seen also a growth. There's actually been an uptick in book sales prior to the pandemic and things like that. Print isn't going to go anywhere, but it is going to be different. And I'm not entirely sure whether daily nationals will survive the established ones, let alone any newcomers to the market. I mean, it was tried in the 80s by a left coalition. The trade unions tried to fund one, and it went disastrously wrong. Like, I mean, it was just so badly done. Like, it's not easy, and you could spunk millions of pounds very easily on a mistake. You need to do things like the way Byline Times have done, is build up a presence and support, and then have, a periodical. But yeah, I'm subscribed to Byline Times. It's great. I suggest people check out, the Independent Media Association, ima.press, and you can see all the partners. I get the Radical Art Review. It's great. So print is part of the thing. And I think when we talk about the future of media, people like to make sweeping statements. We all do. It's exciting. This is dead, and this is what everything's going to be. And it's not. What we're going to see is a lot more bespoke patchwork of things. And actually, I don't know if you're aware of the third industrial revolution. There's that idea that we're going to have like more artisanal, smaller scale production of a lot of things. That is potentially the way things are going to go, because I think within media and if you can access that all in one place, that means that you can go, yeah, I like these guys, oh, that's cool, and like, that to me seems like the future. You can dip in, you can have reflections, and you can get instant response as well. I'm hoping that the future becomes less reactionary and less determined to have this sort of immediate cycle excitement. It's very thrilling, but I'm not on Twitter. I don't spend any time on there. It'd be an extraordinary waste of my time because I'm actually trying to achieve things.
So accurate. Yeah.
What's the point? And it's a left-leaning platform, and it's a lot of left-wingers wasting time, extraordinary amount of time. I think we're defined by our actions. We're defined by what we do, not what we say. If what we say is our action, if we are a journalist, then absolutely that defines us. But people aren't there as journalists. What was it originally called? A microblogging site, which, by the way, takes the worst thing on the internet, blogging, and then just dumbs it down even more. Like, it's an appalling platform. It's worse than Facebook, in terms of Facebook at least has an element of connecting with friends and family and communities, and has communities of locality. I mean, Twitter is just an opinion machine, and it is for people to be right, not or in fact, the attempt is to be perfect rather than to do something of value. And for me, that I hope that's not the future of information. I don't think we all need to be right and perfect. I don't think we can be, because we're human beings. I think what we can be is well informed, and we can do our best to make the world a bit better. And together, I think we can achieve that.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, follow me on Twitter, or sign up to our mailing list. Thanks a lot to our sponsor, ExpressVPN, the #1 most trusted VPN. Get lightning fast connectivity with servers in 160 locations across 94 countries. Keep your browsing privacy safe with ExpressVPN, and get a 35% discount on 12 months of ExpressVPN when you follow the link in the description below. Don't forget, my book is now out and available to order on Amazon and on bookshop.org. That's Brexit, the Establishment Civil War. And most importantly, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.